Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. Oh, bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It is delightful to be here with you this evening alongside Justin, where we're going to be diving into all things supplements and why that might be making your pee very expensive. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Good to be here. Supplements. It's something that everybody wants to talk about. Most of us are taking some or a lot. It's funny. One of my more common things now, like with clients, is I've got people sending me like these big lists of supplements that they're taking, and I'm
Yeah.
finding it more common that people are actually asking me to help them whittle it down. Like
Yeah.
people are spending a lot of money on it, and they certainly have their value. I do think that it's a relatively saturated market, though, and we need to be aware that not each and every supplement that's a good idea is for us and for our physiology, but the ones that are. Right? It's an area that can certainly support a lot of these genetic weak points or just areas within your health that need that extra little bit of support. But it's something that has to be navigated. I mean, gosh, you're going to end up taking 40,000 pills and spending $50,000 per month if you don't find some way to specify and find what's the real deal for you. So hopefully we can get to
Yeah.
some of the bottom of that tonight.
Yeah, I think, we're seeing two different shifts within the space, right? And first, before I dive into kind of my philosophizing on it, Christina, hi and hello to our audience. We're so grateful that you guys are here. It's so delightful, I think, week over week to see some of our I lovingly refer to you as frequent offenders. Justin and I are frequent offenders here. So hello everyone. And I'm currently in Toronto. We're experiencing a crazy heat wave, so I hope those that are experiencing the heat wave as well are keeping well and safe and hydrated and all the things in between. I know Napita is not overly excited about it, but here we are. So, where I was going to go, I think this idea of deprescribing is something that's so interesting. I'm seeing more and more pharmacists, right? So, pharmacists deal within pharmaceuticals. And there's an interesting shift within even pharmacy where people are going to pharmacists or doctors and saying, hey, I'm on a lot of stuff. How can I reduce this? How can I come off of some of this? And we're beautifully starting, thankfully, starting to see similar trends within the supplement industry, even though this industry is growing and arguably becoming more influential and arguably becoming something where people are deferring it to a little bit as opposed to a provider, right? So Justin, for your awareness, I don't know if you knew this, the supplement industry around the world right now is, or sorry, this is as of 2 years ago, is $320 billion, which is a crazy amount. And that's expected to almost double within the next few years because there's this shift towards supplements and the shift towards maybe as you deprescribe off medications to come onto supplements instead.
Yeah, well, I think it's likely representative of the larger problem facing healthcare and what we're really looking at because a lot of practitioners, regardless of what discipline you belong to, I think they're still using the that sounds like methodology, right? And you
Yeah.
get a patient coming to you and they have fatigue, and it's like, well, that sounds like thyroid or that sounds like, an adrenal symptom. So they'll prescribe something to help support the thyroid or the adrenal or whatever they've decided on or kind of landed on, but the bigger problem is that we know that we need to be way more specific than that. We can't use the that sounds like anymore. And when we're talking about supplements where the patient is paying for them and taking them, not knowing if it's right, that sounds like model is actually fairly damaging and can help, but you're really throwing spaghetti at a wall with it. And it's a particularly expensive plate of spaghetti.
A very expensive plate of spaghetti. And I would also offer one that's a little bit of a science experiment. Like at no point in time in our evolutionary history as organisms, as human beings, have we ever been afforded this ability to take this small little capsule, pop it in, and have such a burst within our body of a specific nutrient or compound or mineral, whatever that might be, for better and worse. So there's an element of, they can take a toll on the kidneys and on liver. And there's an element of we're now learning what is that going to look like? Are there any consequences to that? Right. And that's not to say that supplements are bad or will cause kidney liver damage, right? I don't mean to say that because I think like in certain circumstances supplements can be health shifting and life transforming, but that's when they're used in specific circumstances as opposed to kind of let's take everything because it's advertised to me, right?
Yeah, well, and what's funny is that, a lot of people they're taking so many supplements that you have to add a
Mhm.
supplement to aid the liver in its ability to deal with supplements. So how about that?
Yeah,
Right? So
yeah,
I think that's why, a lot of our philosophizing on this is like supplements, they're a part of the protocol, right? Like
yeah,
we have all these different protocols, they're lifestyle related, they're diet related, detox related. We're going to focus on sleep, all of these areas. Supplements come in that they can help to reinforce weak areas or areas where you can't quite get there with eating. Like I'll use an example. Like we talk a lot about these estrogen pathways, right? We've got a great genomic pathway for the steroidogenesis kind of process in the body, I'll call it. And we can see that people who make too much 4 hydroxyestrogen or 16 alpha hydroxyestrogen, and we know that things like DIM and sulforaphane and indole 3 carbinol can be very useful in that pathway. We know that those are extracts of food. But when we're talking about a genetic issue here, where from the moment you hit puberty till the moment you hit menopause, you're making more toxins on the inside based on the estrogen pathway, you'd have to eat tons and tons of broccoli. I mean, you'd probably give yourself
yeah,
a GI problem just by trying to get that clinical
yeah,
dosage of DIM that you would actually
yeah,
require to moderate that pathway. So that's where supplements do have a value and a use. Sometimes a
yeah,
big dose of something that's really specified in a food group, getting it independent of the food group sometimes gives you the best of both worlds.
yeah. And I think there's also instances too where it just gap measures a failing within the food industry, right? And so what do I mean by that, right? So it's not new news that a lot of farming practices with industrial farming, we don't rest our soil and a few other things, which has led to incredible nutrient impoverishment, mineral impoverishment within the soil. So for example, right? Um, Vegetables should be the most plentiful source of magnesium because magnesium should be one of the most plentiful minerals within the soil. And our body has evolved over time to rely on magnesium in part because it's so plentifully available and to the end, we're over 300 enzymes within the body, 300 processes within the body require and rely on magnesium. And again, this made sense in the way that we came about because we always had access to vegetable and the soil was always rich in magnesium and that would come into the food. Now, even my proper vegetarians, and by that I mean who eat a really plant forward diet and are doing it properly. They're not the carbitarians, just eating pizza in place of meat. Even my proper vegetarians, I see deficiency in magnesium. And that's not a failing of them not eating enough vegetable. That is a failing of the food complex that has really depleted the soil. And so here's another example of where something like magnesium within a supplement is pivotal, life changing, and health altering. Right. So Justin, today, audience, for your awareness, what we're going to dive into is kind of how the supplement industry, to a certain extent, is trying to sell you stuff you don't need, how you might want to go about thinking about what supplements you're on, right? And things to be very mindful of when you're purchasing supplements, because unfortunately, for better or worse, not all supplements are created equal. Not all supplements are compounded and manufactured equally, right? Justin, did I miss anything? Do we want to toss in?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is that this is kind of a category thing. Like, we're going to be talking about different types of supplements, and we're going to be talking about how to prioritize, this supplement
Yeah.
versus that one. And I'll share part of my method right off the bat. I know we want to get into
Yeah.
the poll and things, um, but I have these different categories that I arrive at, right? So I have ones that are kind of the mandatory area of supplements where it's like, listen, my body doesn't do this well genetically, and this pathway just needs to be supported to manage that genetic expression, right?
Yeah.
Look, for example, vitamin D, like I have all three of the genes that we look at are suboptimal. I happen to live in
Mhm.
British Columbia, so I don't always get the sunshine. And so
Yeah.
that represents a void within my genetics, within my physiology that needs to be supported. I can suntan and that helps. But supplementing is going to really keep those levels very high, and I need it because of all the great anti-cancer properties, anti-inflammatory properties, et cetera, that vitamin D has. So I've got that first category that's filling in a gap, and then I have another category that's kind of cyclical, right? Like
Mm.
a couple times a year, I'll do like a big peptide stack for healing and just getting my joints and everything nice and strong. So I'll cycle those types of things. And then I have ones that are just kind of on hand,
Mm.
like a gluten guardian for if I'm going to have a cheat meal, or some
Yeah.
nootropics if it's a day where the words just aren't here and I've got to speak to you folks. And I'm like, this is going to be terrible if I don't take some nootropics. So an on hand category as well. I kind of put it
Yeah.
into those three different ones, and it helps to sort out what I'm doing nicely.
Yeah, I like and an audience, one thing I wanna highlight with what Justin just said, and this plays into something that Ted said in the comments. So Ted made a comment that it seems like more and more experts are kind of coming out with this fancy new supplement that they've reinvented the wheel to a certain extent. Um, and while there is some reinventing of the wheel, I don't want to dismiss that. Oftentimes it's more an influencer trying to get money. Nothing that you've so far said is I listened to a podcast or an Instagram feed or whatever the young folk are doing nowadays, recognized that I have a problem that they identified and started taking their supplement. Everything you said was more founded in I know the basics my body needs, and so I support those. I know my genes, and again, basics that my body needs. And then separate to that, I have kind of a little bit of a store, a first aid store, if you will, of supports when I know I'm going into situations that I will need support. So it's support driven and health driven and body driven, but not necessarily sales and problem driven.
Yeah, good way to put it, Dr. K.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think one thing that, if you would never, if you had a health problem, right? You're not necessarily going to go to a salesperson and say, hey, salesperson, how do I fix this? You're going to go to a doctor. Just like if you have a health condition and you're like, hey, maybe I should be taking something to this, you're not going to go to a salesperson. You're going to be going to a doctor, right? Because the doctor can say, let's confirm you have that condition. And then separately, let's confirm the right thing for you, right? And they'll say that in awareness of what's going on health wise. And additional and separate to that, they'll also say that with their awareness of medical knowledge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And pharmaceuticals are like that as well to an extent,
Yeah.
right? I mean, without getting us in too much trouble here, it's like, when you see a pharmaceutical commercial and it says, ask your doctor
Yeah.
about this or that,
Yeah.
that's salesmanship. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be asking your doctor what to take, right? Your doctor should listen to the problem, understand it, and then, recommend the appropriate thing. But you shouldn't be asking because you saw a brand, right? That's like, I think I
Yeah.
have that problem. I'm going to ask my doctor about that brand and see what he says. Like, it's
Yeah.
a weird
Yeah.
salesmanship thing that I think we should be avoiding to the best of our ability.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not too, I think it's important we don't disempower people or tell people they can't do this themselves. Cause I think, especially with certain general things, there's people can educate themselves really well and figure out to a certain extent a general supplement protocol. Um, And I really offer there needs to be an element of education around what is that appropriate protocol for you, right? Working to initially, at least with a provider, to figure that out, but then also finding your way to the appropriate amount, right? Like I think I see sometimes people will go to their supplement store and they'll kind of just pull a bottle off the shelf and it'll say like detox or liver support or something like that. And they'll take that just simply based on what it's titled without awareness of what's actually in it. Is there overlap with other supplements that they're taking, which is a big one? And are all the elements in it actually helpful and supportive to them? How often, Justin, when you're doing supplement cleanup for people, are you seeing that people are on like they maybe have 4 or 5 different bottles that are kind of formulas meaning there's more than one ingredient in that formula, and all 5 of those bottles have the same ingredient, and so they're almost 5 times dosing that what they
Oh
should
yeah,
be taking.
yeah, that happens a lot. Like with, for example, like B vitamins. It's like someone will show
Yeah.
me their stack, and it's like they're taking a complex, like a B
Yeah.
complex, and then they're also taking niacin, and then they're also taking a biotin and this, and I mean all of these different things that are already in the first formula that you're using. And then
Yeah.
meanwhile, they have an anxiety problem or something like that. And I'm like, well, you are macro dosing with B vitamins every morning.
Yeah.
And that could be, a correlative there. And we need to be careful with the genes, right? Like we know that
Yeah.
certain things will speed up or slow down some of these enzymes. And if we know that you're genetically already too
Yeah.
fast there, we don't want to over support it, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't want to over methylate. We don't want to over, have such a fast enzyme that things are just metabolizing like crazy. I see mistakes like that all the time. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
most practitioners don't have the genetic information on hand yet. That's what we're
Yeah.
working on. You're right. The DNA company, we're certifying more people and getting this information to more and more practitioners. But I'll tell you, it's very common. Someone's like, well, my gastroenterologist said this. I'm like, right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that they didn't have this particular enzyme that I have access to. They didn't. So that's why I'm recommending caution with this protocol versus that one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the study of methylated vitamins is a very interesting one because it really speaks to how the industry operates. And I won't go too deep into this, but audience, I think it's important just to hear this. So 10 or 15 years ago, the gene MTHFR got really, really, really popular, right? It was correlated with a lot of cognitive outcomes. It was correlated to an extent with autism, and it was found to be really influential in heart health and a few other things. And so people got really obsessed. They were taking this one gene, they'd get that gene genotyped, and they'd start taking methylated B vitamin or methylated B9, which is methylated folate. Okay. And at the time there was an element of that was the best science. And but the supplement industry jumped onto that. They said, let's start talking about MTHFR. It sounds fancy, and let's put methylated B9 in everything. So we can claim that this is something that supports methylation, and therefore we can also claim that it supports cognition, it supports your heart, it supports all of these things, all these things that this gene had started to be tied to, right? It supports heart health. And if you could put that on a bottle, it sounds really fancy and everyone should take it. And then when that started selling, you started seeing methyl B9 show up in things that I, as a practitioner, sit there and say, that makes absolutely no sense as to why methyl B9 is in there, right? It's maybe I'm making something up, but maybe it's about a constipation formula. I'm like, there's no reason you need methyl B9 there for constipation, other than on the label, you can now say, well, hey, we support methylation. We do all this, right? There's an element of sales tactics. And as time progressed, right, because this started about 10, 15 years ago, as time has progressed, I'm still seeing so much methyl B9 in absolutely everything, even though A, our genetic understanding has come a lot further. There's other genes you have to think about other than just MTHFR. But additional to this, I'm seeing people again on these complex formulas that are taking methyl B9 5 times a day. And to Justin's point, that can lend to a lot of anxiety and a few other things. So being mindful not only of why individual elements are in your supplement is important, there's a history there, but making sure there's not overlap, right? Justin, do you want to talk as well, another consideration I know when we make for when we're trying to slim people's protocols down, when we're trying to consider protocols, is the person before us and what is an appropriate dose. So, for the audience's awareness, I'm a tiny little woman. I'm maybe 5'5". I should know this. I think I'm 5'4" or 5'5", and then I'm probably about 120, 125 pounds. Justin, sir, how big are you? You're what, six what, and then a lot of weight, a lot of
I'm
muscle.
s- I'm 6 even, and I'm like 205 at the moment. In the summer, I'm a little lighter, but point being, Dr. Krista and myself would not be on the same dosage for the same supplement. It would be madness. And that's
Yeah.
just one consideration, right? There's also things like age, there's also activity levels. There's so much little overlappy pieces with this, and lifestyle, and what's your diet like, etc. Listen, if you eat predominantly organ meats, I'm not going to suggest that you need to dose up on a whole bunch of, vitamin A supplements, because
Could be
I know
dangerous.
that your
Yeah.
diet is massively saturated with vitamin A. We probably push
Yeah.
you into toxicity zones pretty easily that way. And on that same note, I need to know what your health condition currently is, because, like, as a blanket statement, I could recommend organ meats or organ meat capsules because they're highly micronutrient dense. But I've had patients before that have like hemochromatosis, and they store the
Yeah.
heck out of iron really easily. And I would not recommend this exact same thing for them. right? So it's like the whole thing that we do is clinical correlation and really trying to understand what this person is, what their genes suggest, what do their labs say, and then navigating and finding the right dose and the right type of supplement for them. It's a very
Yeah.
individualized process.
But but I just want to come back to the difference between our bodies, right? So you're a bit younger than me and markedly more active than me. Justin's in the gym almost every day, and I'm working on 3 times a week. I'm getting pretty good at it, but
Sure.
there's a marked difference in age, gender, height, and weight. And yet, if we were to go to the supplement store and look at a bottle off the shelf that says, "Hey, take 2 caps once a day," whatever it might be, the amount compared to my body and the amount compared to Justin's body are going to be markedly different. And therefore, so will the outcome be in the extent of maybe I'm overdosing or, and Justin's underdosing, right? Any which way, or maybe it's a perfect dose for me and not at all for him. There's different combinations, but it's this idea that when you're pulling something off the shelf without someone standing there and saying, "Hey, you're a bigger person, you might want to take more. Hey, you're a small person, you might want to take less. Hey, you are postmenopausal compared to you're still menstruating." All of these things have impact that are not necessarily captured, and that nuance isn't always offered when people are talking about, "Hey, take this or don't take that." Right?
Correct. Yeah, and it's also, there's this idea of the RDA, right? It's like the
Yeah.
recommended daily allowance or whatever that stands
Yeah.
um, for micronutrients, right? And it's like based on pretty much nothing. If you actually read it, it's like, oh, this is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, and there's no specification beyond that. And so then you'll read a supplement, it's like, oh, this has 2,000% of the RDA for vitamin C, and it has like you can't even go off of that whatsoever, right? So you need to have more like diagnostic tools and things at play. And I really recommend knowing what systems need support in the first place as well,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I know my brain needs to work. Let me take a brain supplement. I know my mitochondria need to work. Let's take a mitochondria supplement. That's why we use genes first, because we can really point towards the areas that are, in fact, baseline suboptimal and need that support. If we've got mitochondrial red flags, okay, we're going to need some mitochondrial support. We can pair that with lab work like 8-OHDG measurements and things like that
Yeah.
to understand if you have too much oxidative stress. And then we supplement accordingly with things that clear
Yeah.
oxidative stress. We need tools. Otherwise, we're just guessing. I mean, if your practitioner is guessing in 2025, it's no good. We've got tools at our disposal now, and we should be using them.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people don't necessarily like this message that you're offering, because the idea is if you need a drug, a pharmaceutical, you go to a doctor and there's control around that, right? Someone has to give you access to that. Someone has to advise you for it. When it's supplements, you can walk into a store and just pull it off the shelf and you get to decide. And so there's this idea of the supplement is less harmful. It doesn't matter. And I mean, arguably supplements are not going to be as harmful if you misuse them. They can be. I want to be very plain, but in generalities, it would be a little more difficult to hurt yourself with supplements other than maybe wasting money, right? But it's very possible. I think methylated B vitamins is a good example. People can give themselves anxiety from taking too much. I've also seen women take a lot of herbs and they've completely messed with their cycle to the end of they'll go through months trying to reestablish calmness within their cycle. I've seen a lot of people, GI tends to be a quite a frequent complaint, right? They'll take a supplement and GI will get messed up. What other things have you seen for people taking just kind of stuff off the shelf and not knowing?
I've definitely also just seen blatant allergies as well. Like
Yeah.
I even experienced that myself with glucosamine chondroitin back in the day.
Mm,
And if you're not familiar, I mean, that's typically utilized for
common.
joint support and for ligament strength and things like that. And I mean, this was 15 years ago, so I was nowhere near practitioner that I am now. But it was like, well, I know my joints need to be healthy, so let me take this. Ba-ba. And I did. And sure enough, I didn't recognize that there's a slight shellfish allergy that I have.
Yeah.
And I mean, this thing, I broke out in hives. It was on my neck. It was all
Yeah.
over me. And I was like, oh my God, I had to run and get a friggin'
Yeah.
EpiPen thing. But contraindications like that can happen pretty easily. You need to really know a little bit about your body. And that's why I always
Yeah.
recommend doing food sensitivity testing and different things. Because one interesting area is when we have these big complex supplements like food, like greens powders, for example, theoretically, it's a really good idea to take a greens powder. But if you react to 3 out of the 20
Yeah.
ingredients in there and you don't know it, you are actually taking a step backwards with that greens powder. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So having more like information about your body before we throw this and that at it is pretty valuable.
Yeah, and being targeted too. I think, um, I I I would offer anyone that has come to me and said like, "Hey, help me with my supplements," and then I say, "Great, we're gonna take you off most of them." They're not happy about that because there's a belief that supplements lend to health, right? Like I will offer the example of you were younger and you were already taking a joint supplement. And I would ask the question of when you're younger, unless you're doing something really aggressive and rough with your joints or you've had, a joint injury, do you need to be taking it when you're younger? I wouldn't necessarily be as confident. Maybe there are specific things, and I don't want to challenge that. But the idea of being very specific with why you're taking something and not taking things that you don't necessarily need becomes really important. Again, to the end of we don't want to overwhelm kidney and liver. We don't want to overwhelm wallet, right? And pills aren't going to fix everything, right?
Yeah, correct. And it's also like knowing which ones do, in fact, interact with the liver and which ones don't as much. Like, for example, I mentioned peptides earlier in the call, and like they don't tend to interact with the liver. There's lower toxicity, but they are very powerful. So there's ones that you just need to know, okay, this is probably going to be a bit harder on my body than this one. And then
Yeah.
there's absorption factors as well, right? Like, for example, some vitamins and nutrients, they absorb better with elevated stomach acid. And those would be the ones that you take with a meal, right? Because the protein will kind of encourage the HCl production.
Yeah.
And then there's ones that are exactly the opposite, right? And like peptides or probiotics and different things. You want to take them totally separate from meals because of that stomach acid factor. Some of them you want to be more alkaline. And I'll actually take a certain list of my supplements with a bicarbonate or it's already added in there to buffer the stomach acid. But then there's other ones I take on purpose with the meal to
Yeah.
get it with the acid. So that's the expensive urine conversation. I mean, that's pretty relevant because if you can't
Yeah.
absorb it, well, what do you think you're doing with it?
Yeah. Yeah. And none of this is to disempower or say don't take supplements. I think Justin and I will both attest that they're very important, right? It's just this idea that we can't think of them as something that you can just pull off the shelf and they'll be magic. There's an element of it needs to be aligned to your specific health goals, your specific health conditions, and experts exist to support that end. Yeah. So why don't we I know this is shifting gears a little bit, but I do want to talk about Black Label. And I want to talk about how Black Label, so Black Label for the audience's awareness, um, is the DNA company's line of supplements here. And I want to talk about a new offering that we're going to be launching July 1 that to a certain extent is aimed at um, addressing some of the problems that we've come about and we've discussed here insofar as it's clinician driven and can be clinician supported, right? It's genetically inspired, and then it's also custom made relative to the person before you, insofar as considering the metabolics. So, how old you are, what gender you are, right? Your height and your weight, and how things change over time, right? So July 1, if anyone's interested, we are launching custom compounding because if you've heard what we've been saying, the idea is no longer that you're always exclusively going to bottles on a shelf that you're designing yourself, but instead designing supplements, minimal supplements, minimal supplements that are very, very specific to you and to what you're trying to do within your health journey. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really like you can find it pretty specified to some of the suboptimal pathways as well, right? Like, for example, we have one called mitochondrial optimizer, and
Mm.
it's if you have the suboptimal SOD2 pathway, which most of you would have heard me talk about on these webinars, it's got some fantastic ingredients for that direct pathway. Like, for example, manganese. The SOD2 pathway is actually called manganese superoxide dismutase. We just call it SOD2, But there's some of these things that are really direct, right? And they're there to support a pathway that we see and we know is suboptimal at a baseline. And the only thing you can do is manage the expression of that gene with the correct epigenetic input. And that's lifestyle and that's nutrients, and supplements are a part of how we support those pathways as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I just as we go on, we'll kind of touch on what exactly that offering is, but keep your eyes open July 1 when we announce that, because it can be a support in particular as you're working with a provider to understand what exactly you should be taking, what is supportive, what is the base minimum. All right. So before we move on to other questions, because I'm seeing our Q&A blowing up with a lot of questions as to supplements, we want to make sure we'll get into some of them because supplements, there's a gajillion out there, so there's probably a gajillion individual questions. But before that, Vanny, if you wouldn't mind, please toss up the questionnaire for us. Thank you. All right. So the first question we asked people was how much a month? It's a month, yes. How much per month are you spending on supplements? Because people, I'm impressed sometimes with how much people are spending. Whoops. So about 30% of our audience is spending more than $200 a month on supplements. So either many agents or perhaps a few expensive agents. And an equal 30% again is spending between $100 and $200 a month on supplementation, right? And then with the balance of the audience, oh, another almost 30% is spending $50 to $100. So we have a lot of people in this audience with spending quite a chunk of change, I would offer, on supplements every month, especially when you consider how much would you say a month-long prescription of B vitamins are? What, like 20, $30? Like,
Yeah, that would be pretty inexpensive, I would say.
yeah. All right. The next question we asked was, what best describes your experience with supplements? A majority of the audience says, I think they help, but I'm not sure what's working. Justin, what often is behind that statement there? Why are some people just not entirely sure of things not working?
It is so common, and that's one of the reasons why when I put anyone on a supplement protocol, I usually recommend you start one at a time, and I also recommend you start at the lower dose and sort of titrate
Yeah,
up. But I think that it's because people are jumping on a whole bunch of stuff at once,
yeah,
and that's really you want to fix the problem. I mean, this comes from people, a lot of them being desperate to fix a health problem, and they're
of
just like, dude,
course.
give me it. I
Yeah.
will like I'll pay for it. I'll take it. I just want to feel better. And it's kind of a problem because if it works, you don't know which component did the working. And if it doesn't work, you don't know which component didn't work. And if you react or something actually bad happens, then you've got to like piece it all together and
Yeah.
figure out what caused the reaction. So, my advice to everyone in this audience is when you start new supplements, do a small dose, titrate up to the full dose, and then only add one at a time. So that way you know what's doing
Yeah.
what.
Yeah. I would also add to this two other variables that as someone that prescribes supplements makes me very sad. One variable is not getting a quality product. Someone thinks they're buying a quality product and either they think they're buying a quality product, and what happens is it's not. You send it for third-party testing, and you're not actually getting what you think you're getting. Another element can be it's not therapeutically dosed. Sometimes you'll pull a bottle off the shelf and it's like, "Hey, this will help with brain," and it'll have an ingredient, and you look at that, you look up that ingredient, you say, "How much dose do I actually need for it to be therapeutic?" Right? So when we talk about medication, we talk about the therapeutic window. And sometimes the therapeutic window says 100 milligrams, and yet in that product, there's only 50, right? So it's not so much that that element isn't right, it's that you're not even reaching that therapeutic dose, right? And yeah, Wendy made the comment of fairy dusting, right? Sometimes there's a lot of filler in product. It's actually not what you need it to be, right? I think there's a popular trying to think of what it would be called, like drink multivitamin that really falls victim to this. It has a lot of everything and therefore nothing of anything. Um, and then the last thing that I also see is that size differential, right? Two caps of a product that are suggested might be too much for me and yet not even enough for Justin. And so there's this element sometimes of when people say it's not working, it is definitely because we start and stop too many things at different times, but there's also, it's just not reaching that medicinal dose for the body for whatever is going on. Yeah. So it hurts my heart that the audience is saying that because I think there can be so much benefit to supplement. Um, and yet that's such a common experience that I would hope can be avoided and hopefully doesn't deter people from taking supplements in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. We asked the question of what is your biggest challenge right now, especially from a what are you trying, Justin, you beautifully put it. People are trying to fix a problem. They're not taking a supplement for the sake of a supplement. They're trying to fix a problem.
Yeah.
A majority of our audience is saying fatigue or low energy, right? um, Followed by weight or metabolism, right? And those two are so tightly linked as well. And I would imagine audience, especially with weight, like I grew up in the 90s and 2000s. We were sold a different supplement every day of the week that was going to fix the fact that we were fat. And I can't imagine those that grew up in the 70s and 80s, probably same, just different snake oils, right? Being marketed to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next question we asked is, have you ever taken a DNA or other functional test to guide? So a lot of our audience has taken the DNA 360, so that's beautiful to hear. We'll kind of speak to a few of the genes as the evening goes on, especially in the Q&A section. Um, but within the app, we're going to make it more accessible to ensure that kind of some of the supplement recommendations come to the forefront. And then a lot of people, Justin, to your wisdom, or some people, sorry, to your wisdom, have said they've done functional labs to help guide things. Yeah. All right. The last question here we asked, what are you hoping to get out of this? And most people picked all of the above, meaning they want to know everything, which is fine. That supports how to save money and simplify, how to understand how bodies and genes work and understand what supplements are right for them. So hopefully, especially as we dig into some of the Q&A, we can be supportive there. Yeah. So Justin, before we transition into Q&A, because I think that's where a lot of the nuance as to what about this supplement, what about this gene, that sort of information is going to come out from it. Let's quickly ensure audience has access to some general guiding principles from us, right? Where do you want to start with those general guiding principles? For those that are on the call, they want to spend less money, they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing supplementally.
I'll say first, supplement timing and the way that you take your doses, I think, is kind of an art form in and of itself because, like vitamin D is a great example of that. We look at the receptor site and different things, and it's like if you just take 10,000 IUs at once, which a lot of people do, you may not ultimately get into the receptor and have the nutrient or the hormone, actually, in this case, do its job and exert its influence over the cells. I always pair this with like just kind of the primal knowledge of going, well, there's no way in one meal I would get 7,000 milligrams of X nutrient. So it's like the body's kind of not wired to absorb large amounts of certain things at a
Yeah.
time. So I do recommend smaller doses of a lot of these things and spacing them out with the first, two meals of the day or whatever it is. Be careful of macro dosing all at once because there are usually receptor sites associated with these things and they can be overwhelmed fairly easily. And if you don't absorb it once again, it's not going to do its job and it may cause expensive urine or side effects. So I would start there. I
Yeah.
think timing and dosing like that is pretty important.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also offer just knowing what you're trying to address becomes really, really important. Because I would offer, I think there's instances, for example, where a multivitamin can be very helpful. But I don't think there's many instances, interesting. I'm sure that's a controversial opinion, and that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. But I would say, instead of taking that general multivitamin kind of as a gap measure, the question really is, what am I trying to support? Am I aware of the gaps in my diet? Am I aware of my health conditions? Am I aware of my genes? And being very, very targeted to that. And very importantly, refreshing and re-asking these questions once a quarter, once a year. You'll find your own point with which that makes sense. But your body changes over time. Your body changes over the course of the year, right? I say once a quarter, meaning 4 times a year, because, well, at least where I live, and this might change for some people, there are 4 seasons, and 4 seasons by and large come with different needs, right? Your needs within the summer are going to be very different than your needs in the winter. And so ensuring that you're adjusting not only as your body goes throughout that year, but as your body get older and your health conditions change, reevaluating that becomes really, really important. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll offer as well that, there's this relationship between what we do with the DNA 360 and then any of these metabolic panels that you would run as well to kind of see what the
Yeah.
downstream effects are in your body. Like,
Yeah.
for example, I mean, we talk a lot about leaky gut, and there's genes that can certainly point toward a predisposition for leaky gut. You can actually run a mucosal barrier assessment and see what your zonulin levels are and see what's going on in the gut, and then, well, if there's actually a problem, I can see it in the lab work. And okay, let's add in some supplements to help support and reinforce the mucosal barrier. Or if you have, elevated urinary bile acids, and it's like pretty good indicator that you have liver congestion going on. It's like, okay, well, maybe some liver support supplements there, some glutathione precursors, maybe some TUDCA, something to help keep the bile flowing, from the liver and the gallbladder and that whole system. So knowing the genetic weak points, but then also having lab markers and things that you can
Yeah.
look at to see what needs support. I mean, it's all going to be
Yeah.
there. The body doesn't lie, the blood doesn't lie, the urine doesn't lie. It's all right there.
Yeah. And have your team of experts that can support that interpretation, I think is really, really important. Having someone that you trust, that you can ask questions and can offer a third party opinion, right?
Yeah.
I, by and large, try not to supplement myself or tell myself to take too many things because I'm biased and I go down rabbit holes that aren't always productive. So I'm always bouncing ideas off of my provider and off of people I trust within my network. And I really encourage the audience to do that. Just make sure you're asking very educated sources, right? A salesperson isn't always the educated source when it comes to what supplement should you take, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other little pearls of Justin wisdom before we move into the Q&A?
I'll say this too, that practitioners have a specificity, right? Like they have an area that they're focused on, and they are going to in fact sell you on that area, and it could be a good area.
Yeah.
This might not be the answer, right? They could say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm a colon hydrotherapist, and everybody needs it for this reason," right? But it's like your problem could be HPA axis. It could be something totally separate from
Yeah.
that. That doesn't make it a bad idea, but it just means it's not the protocol that's actually going to, zoom in on the problem and help with the problem. So every practitioner kind of has their own niche, and just understand that that's what they're going to talk about. That's what they know about. That's what they went to school for. And they're going to recommend things surrounding that area. I like what we do as practitioners because we try to be pretty holistic, right? Like we're talking about different systems of the body. I'm never going to know as much about colon hydrotherapy as a colon hydrotherapist, right? And there's times when we need to send people to these areas or a
Yeah.
chiropractor or whatever. But when we're talking about real functional health practitioners, having some knowledge in all of these areas, it's very useful because we can understand weak points in many, many different areas, and then know what the appropriate supplement
Yeah.
protocol is for all of the above. So just know that your practitioners, you want to make sure that they're pretty well rounded in what they know about as well.
Yeah. No, I like that.
That sounded cocky. I'm not like all practitioners are valuable. I'm not saying I'm superior or anything. I'm just saying knowledge of a bunch of areas
Yeah.
has its use.
It's you're very well read, well studied, and well practiced in what you do. We don't need to belittle you, but I appreciate your dose of humility there. All right, let's jump into some of the questions and answers, audience, so that we can support you in your understanding here. V is asking, uh, what do you think of methylene blue, and which DNA markers tell which of us can benefit from it, or those that it would be negative for? Thank you. Yeah, so Justin, I know you really like methylene blue, so why don't you speak to the audience a little bit about what it is, and then I'm going to kind of round out with an opinion at the end as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So methylene blue, it's a pretty fascinating little molecule, and it's one of these things that aids something called the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. Um, it's definitely a little bit controversial, right, because of some of its capacity to make your brain tint a little bit blue. There's certain things that people are a little bit concerned about. The reality is the reason why it does stuff like that is because of its specificity for the mitochondria. the brain is hugely dense in mitochondria. So, of course, that's one of the areas that the methylene blue is going to go towards. It can increase electron transport by up to, I think, 30% or some wacky number. And especially if you pair it with something like a sun exposure, because the photons of light sort of activated and they can help to upregulate the mitochondrial pathway. With regard to the genes, I mean, we talk about namely the SOD2 pathway there because it's really important for how the mitochondria function and how they clear free radicals, in response to energy creation there. So I'm a fan of it, honestly. I think methylene blue is a pretty handy ingredient. That doesn't mean it's for everybody. But if you definitely have like a mitochondrial issue, I think it's one of the more powerful things that you can add in there as well. But if you've got an optimal pathway and your energy's good and this and that, I wouldn't say it's in your top 5 supplements that are, necessary either. What do you think about it, Dr. K?
No, I think that's a beautiful answer. I think methylene blue is an example of something that became very trendy and to an extent for really good reason, right? It really did address, especially in the wake of COVID and people were struggling with post-viral infections. There was a strong case to be made for it as part of a recovery plan, right? Part of a clinical plan. Take it for this long to support this condition. You're expecting this sort of outcome, right? Is it something that you would take on a daily basis based on genes? I would offer absolutely not. Unless, right, again, there's that chronic condition you're being supervised by a doctor, and the doctor's saying, we're going to take it for this long for this reason, right? I think when it comes to genes, we can really look into, you know, are you susceptible to mitochondrial damage, right? Are you susceptible to things that would not directly but indirectly harm the mitochondria, right? Think about detox, think about susceptibility to illness, etc., right? And that might motivate and prompt a prescription there, right? But I don't think genes will ever say you absolutely need something, right? And I think this is important. So with audience, hear me when I say this. When our Black Label custom app comes out, you're going to have the ability to go in and based on genetic need, pull out formulas that support genetic weakness, right? So for example, we do have one formula that's very specific to mitochondrial support. And so if you look in your DNA 360 and it's saying, hey, right, you may not have the greatest mitochondrial antioxidation. You may want to consider this, especially if you're going through periods of illness or stress or whatever it might be. And you can pull that up. These agents are supplemental and exceptionally supportive, but not an aggressive medication like methylene blue might be. They're, be mindful of the difference between the daily and kind of supportive act versus the more medicinal curative act. Okay. It's an important thing to work through. And if it's something you're questioning, do I not? That's where you bring in the role of a practitioner to come in and say, hey, I have this genetic weakness. Would it be supportive to take a supplement to the end of helping it on the day to day? Right?
Yeah, that's a great point because there's the more basic strategies and ingredients, and then there's way more advanced ones. Like, if you were going to just support mitochondria just because of the genetic red flag, but you don't find it to be an actual health implicative issue, well, yeah, I mean, getting a good, tocotrienol based vitamin E and a ubiquinol and some manganese,
Yeah.
some of the things that the pathway just needs, that's
Yeah.
going to do 90% of the heavy lifting on your
Yes.
day to day. But to Dr. K's point, then if more advanced protocols are necessary, you can do the carbon 60, the methylene blue, the red light therapy, right? We can get more and more advanced depending on the complexity of it. If you're one of these people who's truly genetically compromised, then you are going to need the basics in place and then perhaps some added
Yeah.
strategies on top of that. But that does not mean it's for everyone and that everyone should go the most extreme route right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, V, I hope that was helpful. And just a shout out to JW in the chat who complimented my cat. That's always going to get my attention. All right. Scott has a question for us. Uh, do you have a recommended provider for doing a health tracking blood work that is outside of official insurance driven medical systems? Um, are there so I guess are there firms like Function Health, good potential vendors for someone who wishes to manage their own health and tracking of metric? Yeah. So, um, I think there's a lot of providers that are becoming more and more to consumer. I think they're offering as well dashboards that can be spaces where you're watching your numbers, et cetera, change over time. The only caution I would offer there is some of the analytics, right? Just ensuring that whatever algorithm they're using, as well as whatever um, normal range, meaning so when you take a blood marker, it comes back with a number. The question is this normal or is it outside of normal? Validating those sorts of things are really important. And this is again where a clinician's insight can become very important. My normal range for certain markers is very different than Justin's for no other reason than he is boy and I am girl, right? Just like my normal ranges throughout the year, throughout the month are going to shift a little bit. And so if the algorithm isn't capturing that, or if the normal ranges are set up for someone else, it isn't always helpful. I think through things like thyroid as well, right? The normal range for that, by and large, has been established off of very sick people. And so there's a huge window for normal within when for many thyroid markers. And that's kind of where a clinician's intelligence can come in. So I think there's a lot of platforms that can be very helpful. And I love technology because I think one day technology is probably going to do this better than people. We're not quite there yet. So make sure that you are periodically, if you leverage one of those services, you're periodically having a human look at it. Justin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would also caution against the that sounds like mentality when it comes to the running of labs as well, because it's
Yeah.
like if you have, Dr. K just mentioned thyroid, so it's like, we've got these markers looking at actual thyroid, T4, T3, TSH, reverse T3, antibodies, etc. But it's like, what lab wouldn't you run if you really understand the holistic nature of the body, right? So, like, earlier in the call, I mentioned urinary bile acids and how that's representative of things like liver congestion. Well, if we understand that a congested liver is likely not going to do the job of converting T4 into the active T3, that can be one of the underlying causes of the thyroid being low. If we're only looking at the thyroid being low and we're kind of guessing at where that's coming from, that's a problem, right? So I recommend when it comes to lab work, doing a more holistic, balanced profile and looking at the gut and looking at the liver and looking at all of these different areas that are contributing factors because we want to identify the entire constellation of imbalances, right? Because we can address this and that, and it might actually fix the thyroid problem in and of itself. So I just recommend when it comes to labs, making sure that you're addressing the main contributors of the body. Do something for the gut, do something for your hormones, have an understanding of cortisol, DHEA ratios. With regard to at-home testing as well, I mean, if you're talking about things like micronutrients, I think SpectraCell is a great company. There's SciFox. They have like at-home blood testing and dashboard kind of things. But to Dr. K's point, some of the recommendations you may want to incorporate a few other pieces of info into.
Yeah. 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 All right. Paul has our next question. Would you recommend broccoli to all regardless of our DNA results? I do a lot of veggies with broccoli and Brussels sprouts weekly. So I want to attack this question from two different perspectives, kind of, and this gets at the difference between diet and supplement, right? So um, broccoli is a broccolite and like kind of similar brands, right, are going to be a sulforaphane or a broccoli extract. And so there's an element of that that has been shown to be very helpful towards detoxification, towards antioxidants, and towards some hormone and liver health. So it's to an extent a panacea. It has a lot of strong indicators in the cases of detox, in the cases of cancer, and a few other agents or instances. Became really, really popular because this compound extract is not something that you could easily do through food. If you wanted to attempt this through food, Justin is going to hold me honest here. I think you're eating close to like a bushel of broccoli a day. Is that true? It's something like that. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's massive. It's massive.
Yeah, it's not something per se that you would be reasonably doing. And additional to that, there's an element of the proper cooking, right? It would be steamed at best, if not raw. You need to have things like mustard there. There's a few other things that would prime your body for it. So it's just not surmountable. So there's a lot of supplements out there. And so if I was to go back to the question around DNA, right, I would still want to couple DNA can indicate it, especially for certain females with certain estrogen metabolism, for some people with detox issues, etc. DNA can definitely do it. You'd want to confirm that there's life circumstances and health circumstances, but you also want to evaluate, are there indicators in your DNA that you shouldn't be doing it, right? So I see Justin, I see you nodding. Do you want to dive into that?
Sure. Yeah, because this is something that a lot of people don't know about, right? And this
Yeah.
is exactly what we're talking about when it comes to precision medicine, when it comes to supplements as well as diet. So there's a gene within the cytochrome P450 family called CYP1A2. And I mean, we talk about it as the caffeine gene, right? Because it plays a pretty big role in the metabolizing of stimulants like caffeine or kratom or any of these ephedrine, some of these stimulants that the body takes in, and the speed of that enzyme determines like how much of an effect and how long stimulants will kind of last and kick around for. But what it really is a phase 1 detoxification gene. And you may have heard people say that turmeric can cause DNA damage and different things. It's not damage, it's that things like curcumin and turmeric can actually slow down the CYP1A2 enzyme, right? So the other thing that would speed it up is, in fact, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli and cauliflower, et cetera, being among them. So let's say you look and you have a fast CYP1A2 enzyme. We're not going to want to do anything to speed it up that much quicker because you can cause an imbalance between phase 1 detoxification and phase 2 detoxification. If it's slow, we don't want to slow it down any farther either, right? So if CYP1A2 is slow and you're someone who's taking in lots of, turmeric and curcumin in supplement form daily, you're probably going to be doing some anti-inflammatory benefit, but you're also going to be slowing down a phase 1 enzyme that's already slow, right? So that exists somewhere in your DNA 360 report. It's in the gene cast for, I think, the anti-inflammatory section. So look at that, CYP1A2. If it's already fast, then we want to be aware of having like a lot of supplement as well as dietary cruciferous vegetables because you'll probably speed it up more and you may cause an imbalance there.
Yeah. Audience, just to preempt Justin a little bit, we don't have CYP1A2 easily or readily accessible within the DNA 360. We do have the data. We're going to be updating through our app in the coming weeks. I don't have a definitive date at this time, and you'll be able to access that information through the app. So if you are testing with us and you have the app, watch your email. We'll let you know when you can access that information. Okay, because it's important. We recognize that. We just have to ready ourselves for the release of it. Okay?
Yeah, but we do test for it. It is
Yeah.
going to be in your panel.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. The next question is coming from Marianne. Hi, Marianne. We see you
Hello.
often. So Marianne's asking if you take magnesium treonate for brain, should you take another form of magnesium as well for the entire body? I love this question because I think magnesium is one of the more confusing things because so remember magnesium is an element and you're never going to get it in just its raw form. It chemically won't exist that way. It's always going to be bound to something. And what it's bound to will have different impact both on absorption, where it's going, what it can do. Justin, do you want to dig into the magnesium a little bit?
Yeah, so there's many different forms of magnesium and they impact the body in many different ways. Dr. K and I actually did a whole webinar on magnesium and it was a really good deep dive on that. So I recommend
Yeah.
sorting through our YouTube page as well if you want a really good deep dive.
Hmm.
Magnesium threonate is fantastic because of its capacity for passing the blood-brain barrier, and that's very useful. But there's a magnesium for every different thing, right? Like some of them
Yeah.
impact the muscles a little bit more. Some of them will engage the parasympathetic system a little bit more. But using just one form over another, you're really going to be lacking on some of the different benefits you can get from it.
Yeah.
So I actually use a complex. I use the magnesium breakthrough from Bioptimizers simply because it's got a good dose of 7 different types in there, and it really covers a lot of the bases. I mean, Dr. K said at the very beginning of this call that there's 300 plus enzymatic reactions that deliberately rely on magnesium.
Yeah.
So these are different forms of magnesium that are doing a lot of these different supports. in the body. So if you only take one form, I would say you're going to be getting some support, but you're not going to get everything that it has to offer. And we burn through magnesium too when we're stressed,
Yeah.
every time we sweat. So it's one of those ones that you want to up the ante typically a bit. And I really like a bunch of different types. You know, citrate
Mhm.
is great, bisglycinate is great, but 3 and 8 is cool too. It's good for the brain, and I
Mm.
recommend staying on that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And Marianne, most people will need an additional form. Justin, hold me honest, but when you're taking a magnesium treonate, I think only about 20% is absorbed. And that's just an unfortunate, that's just kind of the max capacity that we've seen body be able to absorb. So if the label says, 100 milligrams, it will probably take 100 milligrams for you to get 20 of that. It's just an unfortunate reality of the body and how it absorbs these sorts of things. So even if you're really just not going to be getting your daily magnesium intake from something that is so poorly absorbed at the GI level, spectacularly absorbed at the brain level. So that 20 is definitely getting up there. It's just that you lose some. So be mindful of that when you're thinking through supplementation of that. Because if you're just doing treonate, you'll probably, to Justin's point, need some additional sources there. Yeah. All right. Our next question is coming from Ted. How and where can we get our how and where can we get our profile of vitamin and minerals and nutrients tested? Monsieur Justin.
So the ones I already mentioned, like the Cyfox is great, as well as what did I say? Spectracell. That's another one that I like it because it does the intracellular measurement there. So it's like sometimes there's a difference between what's in your bloodstream and what's in fact getting into the cells. So like with vitamin D, we talk about that because you can get the blood value, but then you can also do the kind of 25 hydroxy, like a better measurement. So I recommend those companies for that. You can also do these HTMAs, right? Like the hair tissue mineral analysis, and those can be pretty valuable as well. Or oat testing, right? There's another one, the organic acid test that you can get, and those are pretty useful. Um, so definitely get, something that you can rely upon, right? And then make sure that the interpretation is there. Um, making sure that you have high quality supplements in the first place is very useful. Obviously, the DNA company, we do our homework to make sure that we got the best sourcing. We work with compound pharmacies, and we can work with a lot of different
Yeah.
metrics because we understand your genes. So, I'll mention again that we do have a discount starting July 1st, which is like what, a week away. And
Oh no, the discount's starting now. It's the
for you
custom
guys, it's
com
starting
it's the
now.
custom compounding that's coming July 1st, but the discount can start now.
Okay, so you guys can get 5% just for being cool and because we love you. You're part of our community. So have a look on the website under the supplement section, and you get all of our different kind of optimizing compounds are on there as well. And then we've got the black label, which is coming on July 1st for home use. And that's even a whole nother level that Dr. Krista worked relentlessly on for months and months. And we thank her for her efforts because that was not a light lift.
No, no. When it goes live, I'll be really proud of it because it does take the person's specific metabolic parameters. So again, gender, age, height, all those things that should be considered when you're supplementing, and allows you to form something with some really quality ingredients that's very specific to what your body needs in that moment, based on genes, based on health profile. We do have some of the formulas available though in our DNA store. And that's what Justin's getting at with that 5% discount. I know five sounds like a small number, but we are in the process of, given the world politics and given the shift in costing of things, right? Tariffs have done that. We're being very mindful that this is impacting a lot of different people, and so we're trying to keep our costs as low as possible. So instead of raising supplement prices, which by and large, which I'm seeing everywhere, we're keeping ours the same. So 5% is a pretty substantial, given everything that's happening. And Wendy, yes, this is available in Canada. Granted, it will be coming from the US over the border. So just something to keep in mind. All right. The next question that we have here, Marianne is asking, oh, I like this question. Thoughts on Senolytics and thoughts on NAD plus? Justin, do you want to talk to our audience about what Senolytics are? And then we already know this one too, Dance. I'll kind of round out why it's really important that you just don't take an NAD, etc.
Yeah, so senolytics are interesting. Basically there's these things called senescent cells, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. They're these zombie cells, right? And they accumulate as we age and they can't quite die. But what they do is they keep on living and they release these inflammatory compounds within the body. And so senolytics would be a class of supplements that can help to sort of clear via something called apoptosis, right? So the programmed cell death is something that you actually want to encourage. It sounds like a bad thing. Cell death, like no, we want some of these things to die and move on, and then we want to create new cells. So like quercetin. I mean, some of these are pretty good ingredients that encourage that pathway and they help the apoptosis process. So it depends, right? If you're like in an older age group and if you maybe have some different mitochondrial issues and things going on, I think that the use of some of these supplement based senolytics can be useful. I'm not quite sold on the pharmaceutical approach to that yet. But this is one of many ways to support that pathway, right? Like we want to encourage mitophagy. We want to clear out old cells and we definitely want to encourage the creation of new ones. I think senolytics can be a way to do that, but like again, it needs to be specified. If you're a teenager, I mean, you probably don't need senolytics, but some people I think can definitely benefit from them. And NAD is very valuable as well, but there's certainly nuances. Correct, Dr. K?
Yeah, so NAD goes again to the end of trying to support mitochondria and some of the energy production that's happening there. It's one of the more tricky cofactors and one that arguably will deplete with age. And it's a more expensive supplement because it's a very difficult thing to kind of extract, stabilize, and toss into a supplement. The one thing I always advise people though before they spend money on this, and again, I haven't looked at pricing, but I would imagine with price shifts over the past year, this has probably gone from something like $100 or $200 a bottle up. And so I always encourage people before they are spending that money on that bottle, do your homework and make sure your mitochondria has its other base workers, because again, think of mitochondria like a team sport. There's a lot of different cofactors that go into creating energy. One is NAD, but there's also going to be manganese, there's going to be magnesium, there's going to be zinc, there's going to be a lot of different B as in Bob vitamins. And if you don't have those supports, coupled with if you haven't removed some other, think of kind of like wrenches in the team, other, inhibitors of mitochondria, you are spending and you're spending $200 on very, very, very expensive urine. So, is NAD a good supplement? In many instances, yes, it can be a great supplement, but do your homework and or work with a provider to make sure that that $200 is well spent versus going down the toilet there. Yeah. So just something to be very mindful of for our audience out there that are considering that $200 price tag per month. All right. Anne is asking the question, if you have suboptimal MTHFR function, do you want methylated B vitamins or do you not want methylated B vitamins? Yeah. Vanny or Katie, as we answer that, I wonder if you could put up the webinar that Dr. Steady and I did on this very topic. And so, in brief, the answer is depends on your genes. It really depends on a gene that we test within the DNA 360 that's called SHMT1. Okay. And that will really curate, are you someone that will receive methylated B9 or methylated, which is specific to MTHFR, well or not? It will also curate, can you receive a lot of B vitamins? Can you receive a lot of methyl vitamins? Can you, like how do we customize that B formula for you? There's a lot of customizations that go into that. So I'd really encourage looking at that webinar, just to ensure that, Vanny or Katie, it's actually the one we did on methylated or methylation, Dr. Steady and I a few weeks ago. I'd encourage you to watch that. Also, just going into your DNA 360, it will say specific to your genes. Okay. Oh, perfect. Thank you guys. It will say specific to your genes if those are appropriate for you. Okay. All right. Um, so Faye is asking a question here. They actually, Faye, I heard that no flush niacin is ineffective. Is that true? Right. Justin, you or I?
I can take a stab at that one. So it's um, Based on what I understand of that whole thing, it's not that it's across the board ineffective. It's a different form that's a little bit more, you'd call it time released, right? Like slower release, because then it doesn't cause, when it doesn't go up as quickly in the body, it doesn't cause as much of a flush. And my understanding is that it's not as effective for some of the things that the full, dose of niacin does, like kind of the triglyceride management and things like that. But as far as its effect on cellular metabolism, it's still going to do, I believe, the same thing that niacin did. Dr. K nodded, so I must have got that correct.
Yeah.
So ineffective would not be the right term for it, but not effective for each and everything that the full version of it would do. Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding. No, beautiful. Yeah. Yep. So it's again that question of niacin and niacinamide, which is the no flush version. Um, they can serve many of the same purposes, but not all the same. And depending on what you need, it therefore may or may not be effective for you, right? This is audience why when we make the statement of go work with a practitioner on your supplements, it becomes so profoundly important because we're here educating you that we don't want to give you expensive pee, but you really have to pull in a provider to support that initial education as to how do we avoid expensive pee. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're ever looking for support in that, don't hesitate to reach out. It's just that it's really difficult to kind of make blanket statements because everything is so individualized here. And
Yeah.
that's what our custom compounding is going to address, as well as a lot of our encouragement. Find a good practitioner that you trust and that you can work with. Yeah. All right. Uh, Diana has our next question. Um, I'm curious how different are one's genes testings versus working with a kinesiologist on muscle testing. So I'll give a bit of context to this. So if you go to someone who's certified in um, advanced kinesiology, there are methods that these practitioners will use to test the fitness of different supplements, namely, and I'm giving a rough description here. You hold something and then they'll test muscles to see is that an appropriate fit for you. So it's some will really leverage this as a means to test, when we talk about that test don't guess. Some people really rely on this. It's not blood work, it's quite literally muscle testing. I would say the answer sits probably within a blending of them. So when you look at genes can tell you for this specific supplement form, is it appropriate for you? Can your body take it in? So, for example, with SHMT1, if you have suboptimal presentations there, taking in that methyl B9, your body essentially holds on to it to the end where you deprive the actual cycling of it. You're creating this artificial deficiency. So genes categorically can tell us stuff like that, right? Genes can also say you're going to be weak in methylation or something like that, or detox, right? What they can't tell you, and this is where testing becomes really important, is that a concern for you? Are you someone where your methylation in this moment isn't working well? Are you someone in this moment where your detox is not working well? Right. And AK to an extent goes to the end of figuring that out. Is something appropriate for you? Is it something I leverage in my practice? Not necessarily always. I think if you find a good practitioner, it can be helpful, but I'd really encourage that coupled with blood work, coupled with a really, really extensive clinical intake. I wouldn't make supplement decisions, to be honest, on AK testing alone. I think it's really important to be guided by genes, and even more so important to be guided by a practitioner with clinical intake and blood work. Yeah. Yeah, maybe not a popular opinion, but it's kind of you want many different perspectives of the same thing to help you arrive at that informed decision. AK can be part of that, but I would never allow that to be the only part. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and genes are going to tell you stuff that other things just really can't, right? Like when we're talking about baseline enzyme encoding for how a lot of these different, like critical fundamental systems of how the body works, um, the enzymes are what are actually facilitating so many of these processes, and the genes tell us what the different speeds and things of the enzymes are. So it's pretty well, it's a fundamental test as far as I'm concerned. Like any practitioner that runs any kind of metabolic testing or does any form of testing would benefit from also utilizing the genomic information because it's just telling you what is the most absolute upstream encoding process for this person. So it allows you to personalize it if you're also using a kinesiology, approach. I think they complement one another. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be one and then
Yeah,
the other one doesn't matter or doesn't work
correct.
together, right? Effective methods can be used together and stacked.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Oh, Montia, I hope I'm saying this name correctly. Miralu, I hope. Asked the question, will these supplements be custom to what our genes are and our needs? The answer is yes to both. So with the app, what will happen is um, I would highly encourage you have your DNA for it. Is it required? No, but I would highly encourage it because what you do is you go into the app and it asks a question of what formulas are appropriate. And so some will be mitochondrial, right? So if you know you already have those mitochondrial weaknesses, this is a genetic inspired formula that will support that weakness. We'll also say like things like female hormone E, where if you know you're someone with a profile that struggles with estrogen, again, it's that targeted support of that. Um, and so, do you need all the formulas? I would offer no, not. And so, if you're looking for someone to help you hone in on what actual formulas are appropriate for you, we will have the ability for you to work with a provider for a one-time fee just to set up that formula for you. Okay, so it's a one-time fee, an intake survey that says like, hey, what are the medical conditions? What are your allergies? How do we ensure that we're not going to be suggesting something that can harm you? Right. Um, and then it can be informed both by your genes and then your current medical conditions. So that's something that's going live July 1. So just watch your inbox for that. Okay. The next question we have is from Sharon. Uh, so with active, I think this is a typo. And I believe this person's asking around cancer patients, not canceling patients. Will Black Label offer cancer safe options? Um, so I would offer if you or your patients are navigating cancer, working with a provider, working through that stream where a practitioner can support the prescription there, uh, would be really, really important because there's a gajillion cancer drugs out there. So it would depend on the individual's regime as well as the cancer. By and large, as I think through things that you'd want to avoid when you have cancer. So, for example, excessive copper, none of that is within our formulas. So, by and large, they're safe. You just have to be a little bit more specific to whatever anti cancer agents the person is on alongside what cancer diagnosis. So, if you're looking for that support, make sure you go through that custom side and don't hesitate to reach out to us because that's a big, scary world. And we want to make sure the adjunctive support there is safe and helpful alongside not detrimenting whatever cancer protocol you're on. We don't want to put you on a supplement that could detriment surgery or radiation or whatever it is that you're doing. So reach out to us for that support. Okay. All right. And Mary Lou said I said the name perfectly, which makes me very happy. All right. Steve has a question here. Uh, what are the top 3 to 5 supplement companies that produce genuinely high quality products without a lot of filler at reasonable price from companies that we can trust? Oh, mon Dieu. Steve, you may not like this answer. I think there's some really good, I'm a little more familiar with Canadian companies. I think there's some really good overarching brands. This said, I tend to look at the formula before I look at the company. And why do I say that? And Justin's nodding, so Justin, you might agree with me. The formula, you want to make sure it's actually therapeutically dosed and targeted, etc., to whatever it is you need. So I go formula first, not necessarily company first. I think there's companies like AOR, Pure Encapsulations. There's a few that do really designs for health that do really, really extensive third-party testing. So I'd always look to the third-party testing. Justin, do you have any other thoughts there? Are you more formula forward or company forward?
I'm definitely formula forward, but there's crossover because there are companies that have a theme of doing it better as well.
Mhm.
As far as meeting all of this criteria is difficult, right? Because we're talking high quality that we can trust and a reasonable price. oftentimes, just being perfectly honest, it's going to be one or the other, right? Like if
Yeah.
it's high quality, it means that they had to put a lot of work into it, and that means that the price is naturally going to be more. And it also depends what we're talking about, right? Because there's so many categories. Like if we're talking about one company that's going to be pretty trustworthy across the board, like I think what you mentioned, AOR, Pure Encapsulations, Thorn, I think Thorn is another great company there, third party tested. I'll share some of my favorites. They're not going to necessarily be on the reasonable price end of things, but it depends what you mean by reasonable. Because if it's going to do its job, to me, it is reasonable that the price point is what it is. Our Canadian dollar hurts me at every possible interval, but that's something that we live with. Keon is great, right? I'm a big Ben Greenfield fan. I love his amino acids, his omegas. There's a lot of great products that he makes. Level Up Health, I think, has some of the most interesting formulas on the market. Um, and again, this doesn't mean you run off and buy everything from Level Up Health, but they've got some really good takes on stuff. And they've got some pretty cool formulations that just take stuff into account that I'm not seeing a lot of other like companies do. So that's LVLUP. They spell it a little bit weird. But then it's more specific, right? Like Beam Minerals. Well, that's one product, Beam Minerals, for the most part. That's fantastic, but they're in a class of their own for what they do. Or like Cardio Miracle is another great example. It's like they don't make 50,000 different products, but for the one that they really push and do, it's top of the line. You know what I mean? So I have some of these companies like Keon and Level Up that I really like as a general thing. And then I have like really specific companies that are like, for this problem, they're the best kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's formula forward.
Yeah. Formula forward.
Yeah, which again isn't helpful advice. And I think too over time you have to be mindful. So for example, like Pure Encapsulations was bought by Nestle, and so there had to be a period where you're evaluating, is it still the quality we had come to know and expect, right? So being mindful that these things will shift over time, and I will suspect there's going to be a lot of quality compromising to keep prices somewhat down, given everything that's happening. Supplements by and large are just skyrocketing in how they're costing. So um, being mindful of every time you purchase to kind of recheck and validate it. It sucks, but it's just kind of the space in the land that we're in right now. And I'd rather give honest, good advice than kind of convenient, easy advice. Yeah. Pellick, I hope I'm saying that right, asked the question, do you recommend genetic testing again after a few months of supplement regime to check on your genetic expression? I'll be specific in this. Unless laboratory processes and DNA extraction processes markedly change, you're not going to need to redo your DNA 360. Your genes are your genes are your genes, right? And again, the qualifier being there, laboratory techniques, but your genes aren't going to change. If you're talking about though methylation testing, right? So think of methylation testing as how are your genes expressing, what stresses are atop your genes, okay? If you're talking about that sort of methylation testing, that's in our DNAging and DNAging premium. Based on whatever it is you're doing, you're probably going to want to retest within 3 to 8 months, depending on the problem that you're tackling. You can talk with a provider. You can talk with us if you're looking for some support there as to how often. Okay. Uh, Elvon, I hope I'm saying that right. Mons, yeah. There's some delightful names, and for audience's awareness, I don't do multisyllabic words, so names are a struggle point for me. Um, what is the therapeutic dose of NAC and glycine? Elvan, just to be mindful of time, depends on what you're trying to support. For certain conditions, 400 milligrams of NAC is sufficient. For other conditions, you want 900 milligrams 3 times a day. So NAC is very dependent as well as glycine. So again, audience is kind of coming back to therapeutic window. What are you trying to support? Who are you? And that will change the answer to that question. I apologize. I acknowledge that's probably not the answer you're looking for. If you're looking for support on some of this stuff, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can set you up with some time to kind of dive deeper into what's appropriate for you. Yeah. Justin, do you want to tackle the next one from Cynthia? She's asking, what are your thoughts on oligoscan? Do you know that?
Yeah, so I've never used it clinically. I've heard all about it though, as far as what it does, and it's one of these at-home tests that really measures, different trace minerals and things like that. And I think that that's, once again, this is an industry that is absolutely becoming a whole new thing because people want reliable ways to track it. I've heard good things about it, but I'm going to be transparent that I've never used it, so I'm not going to get behind it or anything like that. But I've heard that it's absolutely good. And I think that anything that you can do to quantify what your internal environment is a worthwhile, adventure. Um, but I've never used it. Have you ever, do you have any friends or anybody who's used that, Dr. K?
No, I'd want to do a little bit more of a research dive on that one. No,
Yeah.
no. Yeah. All right. Faye is asking the question of what time of day is best to take niacin. So again, this kind of goes back to the flushing question. Um, so there's an element of, depending on the dose, if you're getting to a dose, a therapeutic dose where you're going to be flushing, there's an element of convenience. Are you at home? That's probably the best time of day. Do you have the time and space to kind of flush out? By and large, though, I think B is in Bob vitamins, especially if it's not that flushing dose. I tend to front load in the day, or maybe front load before a workout. Justin, any thoughts there?
I think it also depends if it is in fact one of the more time release formulas, right, which is going to take a while and kind of trickle into the bloodstream versus like a big whopping dose. I know that people like to do it surrounding sauna use as an added detoxification strategy, and you got to be pretty careful doing that. But if it is like an extended release one, you could probably take it anytime during the day because it's not going to be something that's going to create a bunch of energy or a feeling of anxiety, that kind of a thing. But I am in the same boat as Dr. K with regard to like anything that's like energy yielding. I tend to just favor the AM, especially if you have like a circadian rhythm issue or anything like that. I don't think you should be dosing a lot of B vitamins in the PM or in the evening time.
All right. Sandy has our next question. What fillers in supplements do you feel are harmful or should be avoided? For example, magnesium stearate. Can you recommend a green powder or a fiber supplement that is clean and free from heavy metals? Yeah, so what Sandy's kind of getting at here is two things. So number one, fillers, right? So when you have a capsule, and let's just say like the dosing of something is 100 milligrams of whatever. Yet the capsule requires 200 milligrams to be full. I'm making something up. What the company will do is they will put that 100 milligrams of the substance in, and then they'll put 100 milligrams of a filler in. Usually, hopefully, it's a benign thing. Oftentimes, it will be not a bran fiber, a cellulose, or something, some plant-based fiber, inert thing, something that if you take a small dose of it, it's not going to bother, it's not going to do anything. Some people are sensitive to these things. Another thing that really happens, and this needs to be mindful of, supplement companies don't have to disclose some of the cleaning agents or some of the lubricating agents that enable their manufacturing and compounding processes. And we're now learning that a lot of people are sensitive to some of these substances, right? And again, they don't have to be listed because it's considered a lubricant or something that goes into the processing but is not formally within. So this goes back to, again, and this is, we're so careful with Black Label. It took a long time to get there because we we're very specific around talking to facilities. What are you putting in things? What are you using to clean machinery? That part's very important as well. And what are you using to lubricate? And it's a difficult thing because really you have to go company by company and kind of ask these questions. So I would say like there's an ever evolving list. We can make it available. I don't have time to kind of iterate through all the individual elements, but something to be mindful of. Usually it's a question of your health picture. Certain fibers that they'll fill things with, rice bran, for example, some people are sensitive to. There's a huge kind of got to dive into the supplement individually. So if you're there's more and more popularity around free from labeling, and so being very mindful and careful of that because again, I think people put free from now to advertise and distract you. So doing your research on the supplements you take is really important. Justin, anything to add there?
Yeah, sometimes there's added ingredients that are kind of contra to what the actual goal of the supplement is as well. Like I was in the supplement industry for 5 years, as far as like the bodybuilding supplement industry, and people would come in to buy. Remember when keto became like a thing, and everybody all of a sudden was talking about keto, 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 and all of these products came on the market. I remember some of the stores that I was managing at the time had like whole shelves of these keto bombs and keto creamer and keto this, keto that, which is cool. I mean, hey, keto is a great strategy for a lot of people, but you would look in the extra ingredients and there would be things like maltodextrin in there, and it's a keto bomb. And you go, well, maltodextrin is something that bodybuilders typically use to spike, blood sugar, and it's almost a form of a carbohydrate, really. So just sometimes when you look at the ingredients, you go, this is the purpose of the supplement I'm taking, and something in the extra is actually also kind of taking a step backwards to the actual goal of the product, right? So you do have to be aware of some of these things. Or like I know people that take a lot of supplements that have, sucralose or even just too many different stevia based products, and they find that they crave sugar all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, you are using sweeteners 3, 4 times a day, but you're on a low carb diet and you're craving sugar. And I think part of that can happen because, you're drinking things that are sending certain signals to your brain to make you still be on that kind of roller coaster, of like just wanting sugar, and then you're kind of substituting with supplements that are sweetened that way. So I'm just saying, be careful, folks, with that kind of thing, because it's not all serving your actual goal. So be aware of that as well.
Yeah. And third party testing, right? Third
Yeah.
party testing, I think, is really, really important, because especially when it comes to heavy metals, right? Heavy metals is really, you need to be mindful of that, especially within herbs. Chinese herbs specifically, but herbs in general, having third party testing there is really important, because how the person's grows things or where they're sourcing that growth, that plant, that's one of the bigger places where the stuff like this can come up. Or if you're trying to buy something cheap, they won't do this sort of thing. So again, it's this trade-off between things are really expensive and that's a lot. Don't want to discount how much things are, but typically the more expensive things, if it's coming from a quality company. Yeah. All right. Our last question is coming from Cynthia. And I like this one because it nicely rounds out the night. Cynthia's asking, how many, or sorry, it's more a statement. There are many nutrients in multivitamins that shouldn't be taken together. So it seems to me that a multivitamin is not a good idea. And the idea here is sometimes there's some things you will take that are considered anti-nutrients. So for example, iron. Iron will bind up a bunch of stuff and prevent it from being absorbed. So there's this idea, especially between minerals and vitamins, that they shouldn't be taken together because sometimes they act as anti-nutrients. You're not getting any of the above and it's useless. And that's kind of what led the idea, I think, of some people multivitamins are appropriate for, but not necessarily all, in this idea of customization. Right, Justin?
Yeah, well, and different nutrients can compete for the same pathways as well. Like we talk about zinc and copper, or iron is going to absorb a little bit better with vitamin C, but it can typically absorb a little bit worse with things like calcium.
Yeah.
So, splitting doses and doing them individually is usually a better idea than a multi. I'm not against it. And I mean, there is
No.
circumstances, right? If you're totally malnourished, I mean, a multivitamin is probably going to provide your cells with just that little bit that it needs. If you're on a pirate
Yeah.
ship and you got scurvy and there's a multivitamin present, hey, take the multivitamin, right? But it's like
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we're kind of nourishing these pathways, and certain things can contraindicate other
Yeah.
vitamins. So just a big shotgun formula isn't always the best option.
Yeah. One of my mentors used to graduate people to multivitamins. He would work with them, and once they found that they had gotten them to a space of good, sustainable health, he would graduate them to a multivitamin, but then reevaluate it once a year to make sure it was still appropriate, right? Because the diet was still good and there was no other health condition percolating up. So they have places, and shout out to the mentors that got me to where I am today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. So Justin, do you want to remind the audience their access to discount coding? And also,
Yeah.
can the audience tell that it was a 20-year-old or 21? I got lectured on that. A 21-year-old who created our discount code.
Yeah, look in the chat there because it's hilarious. And shout out to Katie in the background for putting that on. So the one is already active, right? So the
Yeah.
5% off of we call them the formularies. So they're just our DNA inspired line that you can get on the website. And that's active now for 5% off. with the discount code. And as of July 1, Dr. K's fantastic work on Black Label is arriving to the world, and we will have a discount for that as well. So is that also? I'm a little bit confused. Is that the 5% as well for that one? You're the expert on this one, Dr.
I
K.
do not believe so, no, it's just the formulary.
Okay. But I mean, the Black Label, it's a game changer because it takes into account many metrics, and so you're going to arrive at a more dialed and detailed dosage of all of the ingredients. So definitely keep your eyes on that one. It's going to be a game changer.
Yeah. All right. I think that's that. All right. Audience, thank you. Thank you for staying with us. We show up for you. And so if you have any comments or questions about this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you're looking for more personalized support, please don't, again, hesitate to reach out to us. Bill is sitting within the chat or should be. So if you want some support from him or us, don't hesitate to reach out. It was delightful to have you here. We're going to see you all this week. We have some fun stuff coming up. And I think that's it. Justin, anything else before we dance out of here? Because dancing makes us what? Happy.
It makes us happy, and I'm so grateful for everybody showing up. I see all the thank yous in the comments. You guys are more than welcome. This is why we're here, and keep showing up, and we'll keep showing up for you.
Mm-hmm. Au revoir, mes amis. Au revoir. Bye.
Bye bye.
Dance out of here.
Music's on time tonight. Fantastic.
Yes, we get to jam to it.